97.1 FM The Drive presents the Behind the Song podcast, taking you deeper into classic rock's most timeless tunes. Here's your host, Janda.
In this episode of Behind the Song, let's dig into the lyrics of People Are Strange by The Doors. A song about the weird effects of feeling isolated, it was released on the band's second album, Strange Days, in 1967. And if there was anyone who knew what isolation felt like, it was the band's iconic, poetic, and troubled singer, Jim Morrison. Raised in a military home, Morrison's family moved often in his early years, from his birthplace in 1943 in Florida to California, Virginia, then Texas, then New Mexico, and finally back to California. His father was a decorated rear admiral in the Navy who expected his family to toe the line. But Morrison was an avid reader, an early outlet for escape from those expectations that remained with him throughout his short life. In fact, he obsessed over books and arcane subjects, and would go to great lengths to find more to read about something once it arrested his mind. His high school teacher in Virginia shared that Morrison was turning in book reports on subjects that interested him, like 16th century demonology, going to the nearby Library of Congress in D.C. to dig into resource material, the only place you could find information at the time about such an offbeat subject. And the beat poets he read were early influences on his own poetry, Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, as well as writers like Friedrich Nietzsche and Albert Camus. Surreal, heady stuff. Morrison was drawn to it like a moth to a flame. He moved to Los Angeles in 1964 to go to UCLA, and he received his undergrad degree at UCLA's film school, right around the time that his father was leading the naval forces during the Gulf of Tonkin incident, an event that led to the U.S. becoming involved in the Vietnam War a year later. So deep was the ideological split between Morrison and the rest of his family that he often said that his parents were dead in interviews, which wasn't true, or that he was an only child when he actually had a younger sister and brother. He was creating his own history while rejecting his past and completely alienating himself from his upbringing. When Morrison graduated from UCLA in 1965, he headed straight to Venice Beach and fully embraced a nonconformist hippie lifestyle, taking copious amounts of LSD. He had already developed a troublesome relationship with alcohol, getting into trouble in his teens for causing a riot while drunk, and that addiction would continue to shadow him for the rest of his life. In 1965, Jim Morrison was as bohemian as you could possibly be, living on beans and writing poetry on rooftops in Venice. And it was there in Venice that he and fellow UCLA film student and keyboardist Ray Manzarek formed The Doors, later joined by Robbie Krieger on guitar and John Densmore on drums. It was also around this time that Morrison met Pamela Courson, a fiery, artistic girl who encouraged him in his poetry and by all accounts was his match. Beautiful, unpredictable, and as drawn to that bohemian lifestyle as he was. The band started doing residencies at clubs on the Sunset Strip in Los Angeles, the Whiskey A Go-Go and London Fog, and they were noticed by fans and by the record business. Their self-titled debut album was released in early 1967 to great success, climbing the charts in the U.S. and eventually becoming one of the most heralded debuts in rock and roll. It happened quickly, with the band going from gigs on the Strip to touring in support of the album as it rocketed ever upward. Much of the material for their second effort, Strange Days, was written either during the time before their debut or while touring afterward. People Are Strange was actually written on a walk in LA's Laurel Canyon, with John Densmore and Robbie Krieger trying to cheer up a very depressed Jim Morrison. Densmore and Krieger were roommates, living in the canyon like so many artists did in the 60s. Up above the city, surrounded by nature, but still very much in the heart of Hollywood, Laurel Canyon still bears the legacy of the many artists who've called it home, from The Doors to Joni Mitchell. Densmore said that Morrison showed up at their house one day, very down in the mouth and in a depressive state. So he and Krieger got him to go on a walk around the canyon with them, thinking that the fresh air and the nature would lift his mood. All of a sudden, while looking over the city, Morrison suddenly got excited and started singing the lyrics to People Are Strange. Morrison said they came to him all of a sudden on that walk, so Krieger and Densmore did more than take their bandmate on a hike to cheer him up. They opened a portal for Morrison to write lyrics to a song that had been bubbling in his brain about alienation and loneliness and how weird it was to be Jim Morrison. The song goes like this, with just a few lyrics that repeat over that slightly odd cabaret-style musical arrangement. People are strange when you're a stranger. Faces look ugly when you're alone. Women seem wicked when you're unwanted. Streets are uneven when you're down. These are words written by a man who knew dark moods, but had the world at his feet. The incredibly handsome Jim Morrison never suffered a lack of interest from people, especially women. He had affairs throughout his relationship with Pam Corson, or from fans, photographers, filmmakers, writers, or friends. But there was one person who flatly told him that he should give up music, even saying that he had no talent for it. His own father, who wrote to him in a letter that he was no artist. This was the psychic blow from which Morrison never recovered and never forgot. The relationship with his father was a closed door, even while the rest of the world and all its pleasures were wide open to him. Already understanding alienation from his youth moving around the country, always the new kid at school, his father's ultimate rejection of his music career, even though the Doors were well on their way to becoming icons, was the root of the inner isolation that Morrison felt and expressed in this song. The lyrics continue. When you're strange, faces come out of the rain. When you're strange, no one remembers your name. When you're strange. Of course, Jim Morrison was wrong about the part about no one remembering your name when you're strange, at least in his case. By the time he was found dead in a bathtub in Paris just a few years after writing People Are Strange in 1971, he was a global rock star, known as much for his poetic lyrics as he was for his on and off stage antics, arrests for indecent exposure, drunken spats with Janis Joplin, and love affairs with women like Uber groupie Pamela DeBar. He wrote his own story, and he did what he wanted to do. A military brat that became a kind of rock and roll prototype. He continues to inspire musicians and fans to this day. Morrison was only 27 years old when he died, part of the eerie circle of rock luminaries who passed on to the other side at that same age, a byproduct of their outrageous lifestyles. Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Kurt Cobain also being members of that unfortunate club. Pamela Corson, Morrison's soulmate, also passed away from an overdose when she was 27, 3 years after she found Morrison dead in their rented apartment in Paris. These were all people whose flame burned bright while they were here, maybe too bright for them to endure. Morrison left us a body of work that was often brilliant, speaking to us especially in times when we're all feeling lonely and isolated. People Are Strange went to number 12 on the Billboard chart when it was released, and the Strange Days album went to number 3. The genius lies in how it sums up the weirdness of living among others when we're all ultimately on our own. A psychedelic song for strange times, then and now. I'm Janda, and this has been Behind the Song. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Janda Lane Radio and on Twitter at Janda Lane. Special thanks as always to Christian Lane for sound design and engineering. On the way, episodes on songs from Cream, AC/DC, and more classic rock and roll.
Put the power of podcasting to work for your business. You can be part of Behind the Song and reach potential customers inside every episode. To advertise your product or service by sponsoring Behind the Song, send an email to podcast@hubbardradio.com now.